Kyle Fincham, welcome to the show. I haven't named this show yet, Kyle, so I'm not going to say what season and what episode this is and the title of the show. If you come up with any beautiful creative names for the show, Kyle, I would be greatly appreciated if you could share some with me. But welcome to the show. This is season one, episode one of whatever title I come up with. My name is Jason C. Brown. I have on the line with me today Kyle Fincham, the Infinite Play Guy on
Yes.
Instagram. And he runs a beautiful podcast himself called Behind the Movement, where he interviews moving artists, martial artists. What would you call these people, Kyle?
I mean, everything from like teachers and facilitators and artists of various movement forms from, various cultures of movement.
Yes, beautiful. So I'm so glad, Kyle. So this is totally down to earth, super simple, very conversational. And you already mentioned two things that I would really love to speak about because not only are you an excellent movement artist and player, but I really appreciate your writing style as well. And I was recently going down all of your blog posts. So if I get confused in many of your blog posts, I truly apologize. But so you just used the phrase cultural.
Uh-huh.
And in many of your blog posts, you write about the counterculture.
Hmm.
Can you explain what you mean about the counterculture? Countercultural artists, countercultural athletes, and you always write about it within relationship to maybe strength training or physical preparation or play or exploration. Can you expand on what you mean by countercultural?
Yeah, I think that like to me, countercultural is just anything that challenges the status quo a little bit. Like the whatever the tradition is, or maybe even it's something that like decolonizes it in some way.
Mm,
Um, and as you were saying it, I was thinking about like a bit of that like trickster mindset, like so like activities or sports or practices that are, yeah, like a little bit more of that trickster place where it's like there's no right way and there's no wrong way, but it's a place where like the boundaries are kind of explored and played with. And I think we just see that in places where things are, yeah, not so kind of linear and hyper defined. That's why I always use examples of like rock climbing and surfing and jujitsu and various forms of dance where it's like, sure, there's techniques and there's moves and their boundaries, but they're there to be played with, but like not within. Whereas like if I go to like a gym, like there are apparatuses and tools and things that are meant to be done a certain way,
yes.
right? And that would be kind of
Yes.
like following like the gym culture, the norm of it. um but if I go in there and I start using like a barbell in a way that like the gym hasn't decided is the way that it should be used,
Yes.
that's like my trickster way. And it would be like, well, you're now like challenging the culture of this place. For me, it would be maybe it would be like a countercultural move.
Right, Kyle. So when I look inside myself and I look at the artist inside me, I think most of my artwork is the art of curation. And I
Mm-hmm.
really love to make connections. And what
Mm-hmm.
you were just speaking about helped me connect with a mentor of mine, Samantha Emmanuel.
Oh, nice.
And I tagged you in one of her Instagram videos of her using the ski erg
Yeah.
in a countercultural way, right?
Uh-huh.
Here we have a
Yeah, I saw it.
beautifully, what's that?
I saw it. Yeah, it was great.
It was great, right? So here we have this trained artist, this trained dancer, and just doing the ski erg as
Mm-hmm.
it was designed to be done, to go back to your point about lifting the barbell the way that the gym says you have to lift the barbell.
Mm-hmm.
Her body is almost too intelligent to do
Mm-hmm.
it in the way that it was designed to do, right?
Yeah, there's a great video of Marlo Fiskin that she
Yes.
made where she was like doing stuff on like traditional gym equipment and like doing it like the Marlo way. And it's so funny. I mean, it's like, I don't know, she's on like an elliptical machine, but she's like squatting on just like one of the foot pedals and like she's kind of bobbing around.
You
as it
must share
goes.
this. You must share this video with me, Kyle. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think a lot about like, I wrote about this recently in terms, speaking of like the writing, is like this idea and permission that like we can disobey,
Yes.
right? Like, and I think that a lot of the spaces, and maybe like I would say that about like the countercultural spaces. I mean, not to say that it's fully that way, but like I get the impression there's a little bit more room to disobey in like countercultural spaces, and then like the kind of the places that are trying to hold on to something or are super defined. There's not as much permission, and there's a lot of judgment when you disobey.
Yes. Kyle, so why do you think I'm sort of down on the whole fitness industry? I get that sense from you as well.
Yeah.
Why do you, I have my own opinions, but I would love to hear your thoughts on why do you think there are these gatekeepers? Why do you think there are these people that maybe require is the wrong word, but why do you think there are these people, I'll say coaches,
Mm-hmm.
trainers, that require obedience? And unfortunately, I think you and I know a few individuals in the movement space as well that require obedience and, uh, you know, right and wrong. Why do you think that exists?
I mean, listen, I try to think back to like a period in my life where like I feel like I required obedience,
Yeah,
right?
I'm sure I did too. Yeah.
Yeah, and like what I was doing and what I looked like, and a lot of that was like ego, right? A lot
Ego.
of that was like control.
Ego on your behalf, ego on part of the coach or the trainer.
Right, right. And like wanting to like feed my own identity and kind of yeah, maybe even elevate it or like sustain it or something. Then there's that, yeah, there's the control thing. And I think that like when people are disobeying around you, that's you welcoming the fact that like you're also going to be surprised as the teacher or the facilitator.
Yes.
And that can be really scary if you are not somebody who's like open to surprise,
Right.
right? Or your kind of capacities for surprise is limited, right?
Yes.
So like if you're going to be someone who like allows disobedience, it's somebody who's like willing to draw outside the lines and not know what's going to happen. So I think that there was a lot of that as well. And we can go down like a huge rabbit hole into like why people want control and fear of death and things like that. But I think that yeah,
I wasn't going to go that deep, Kyle.
yeah, yeah. But I think that these are kind of like the things that are attached to that.
Yeah. So I'm really inspired by this form of practice known as play practice.
Mm-hmm.
And it recently came, it's not recent. I mean, it's pretty old school, but they call it play practice actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a games-based approach to
Mm-hmm.
learning. And the pushback that I get from other coaches is just incredible. And I'm thinking that's because you want to. So the games-based approaches are always, I mean, it's pretty much your infinite play workshops, right? It's I'll say artist centered. It's athlete centered. It's experience centered instead of coach centered or trainer centered. And the pushback, it just amazes me that the coach is like, no, you need deliberate practice and it needs to be 5,000 repetitions of this same monotonous move on Thursday night and Monday night. And these authors that write heavily on play practice can provide citations and references to the science of human movement and the science of learning and neuroscience and plasticity and variability and all those things, but still the pushback that I get from traditional coaching is incredible.
I mean, listen, I mean, that is like the fear of uncertainty in its like most glaring form. It's like we're willing to jump through hoops, right, to try to like preserve our certainty.
Yes.
And even though like we know that the world is random and we know that when we turn the corner, there's going to be a surprise, right?
Yes.
We want to like do everything we can to like maintain that, and going so far as to like ignoring you know how how learning actually takes place. I'm not like, listen, I read science and I listen to plenty of science related things because I know that it matters and I learn a lot from it in terms of kind of attaching um, greater information to like the things I'm presenting. It's not the thing I lean the heaviest into. I find myself being more experiential and maybe more artistic. But, like I did listen to that Huberman uh, Lab podcast about play. And on more
Yes,
than one occasion, he said, play is the fundamental portal to plasticity,
that's
right? So,
beautiful.
like the way that like our brain changes, that is like how it learns, is by playing. Like it has to be surprised.
Yes. I need to go back and listen to that. I appreciate you sharing that with me.
Mhm.
Sometimes I just don't have the patience for a 3 hour long
Yeah, yeah, true.
scientific podcast. I'm like, oh, thank you, Kyle. Hold on. Let me block on 3 hours.
Yeah, I have a friend who listens to him though, but always plays it on like 2 times speed, so it just like gets through a little quicker.
Right. Yes. Great discussion. So, Kyle, you keep bringing up the term like surprises
Yeah,
and stuff like that. Are you into improv at all? You did stand up comedy, correct?
yeah. I mean, I went to theater school. I did a lot of like improv classes. Like when I first moved to New York, I did probably, I don't know, 5, 6 like multi-week classes at the Upright Citizens Brigade, which was like a really famous improv troupe here. I was never on like a team, but I did a lot of their classes.
So
When I did stand
educate me, Kyle. When you say improv, like contact improv that you and I maybe from the movement world would be
No, no,
more
no. This
familiar
was
with?
this was like theater, like improv comedy, like long form improv, like where like Dan Aykroyd and Chris Farley and Amy Poehler, like all these people came out of like the improv world, and they'd all studied long form improv under this guy named Del Close.
Yes.
Another great book he wrote. I think Del Close wrote this book called Truth and Comedy, which is about long form improv, which I feel like would probably be a really valuable thing for people who are interested in like improv or freestyle or open form to read, because it's again, it's all talking about the same thing, but in this case it's just about like long form comedy. But also when I did stand up, it got to a place where I was like doing primarily like crowd work for like the latter part of my stand up career, which I would say I was good at. Like I had like a pretty decent kind of schedule, and that was what I capitalized on.
Right. How is
Um,
the crowd work? I love Andrew Schultz's crowd work. I don't know if you
oh
follow
yeah,
him or watch him at all, but he just goes out and whatever is there.
he and I started together.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we did like open mics together. I think I still have his number on my phone. Um, um, yeah, I mean, it was in the same. I don't know if I haven't watched any of his stuff, but I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I hosted shows for a long time, which meant that like you would go out and like do a lot of like, hey, where are you from? But then like things started to like emerge from that, and I could do like more scenes and characters that kind of emerged from the crowd work. It's not always what I wish I would have been doing, but I realize now it was like a powerful skill, and that like has like played a role in how, not just how I kind of can present to groups and classes, but also like if we can explore that feeling of getting lost in so many different ways, through like a conversation, through nonverbal interactions like contact improv or jujitsu, and like it's all kind of to me like feeding that same thing, that like mindset of playfulness. So without
Yes.
even knowing, I was like, oh, to some degree I was like exploring getting lost.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you feel you use that currently in your infinite play workshops and your physical presentations?
Like the
Your
skill.
your your previous training as in theater,
100%, 100%, 100%.
100%.
Yeah, I tell, like I don't walk in with like a syllabus or anything, like a
Right.
plan. I don't walk in with a plan. I know the things that like I like to do, and then some things, you know, I paint with the colors that are there, the same way that I think I would go on
I
stage and like,
paint, hold on, I got to write that down. I paint with the colors that are there. That is
yeah.
sweet. Thank you so much for that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So like maybe I walk in with like the canvas, but like everyone else there is like their unique colors. And yeah, the only way to really know like what should be presented is like by getting to be with the people who are there. And I think that that's, you know, what I like about this idea of facilitating rather than teaching.
Yes,
Um,
I love the way that you use that term.
yeah, I stole it from Shira Yaziv. She was the first one who said it to me, like, teaching is this idea that you show up knowing what other people need to learn, and facilitating is like creating opportunities for people to learn what they need to learn. And I spoke to,
I think Bruce Lee had a similar
yeah,
vein of thought on that.
I talked to Joseph Bartz a little bit about it when I was in Berlin, and he turned me on to this idea of coyote learning.
Coyote learning. Hold on.
Yeah, which
I need a bigger notepad, Kyle.
yeah, I wasn't familiar with it, and I haven't done a ton of reading on it, but he referenced this guy Tom Brown, who I think teaches like bushcraft or survival skills somewhere in New Jersey, I think, and I think he's been around a long time, and I think that he's a big fan, and I think that he references coyote learning, which I think is in certain cultures like an indigenous way of learning, which is what we're describing. It's like experiential learning through facilitation, kind of like, okay, like I'm a mentor, I'm a guide, I'm going to take you out into a place, and there's a container in the place that I'm taking you to, and I'm going to kind of ask some good questions that cause you to go look for things and find the things that you need to learn, as opposed to me walking out and being like, here it is, hold this, this is exactly what it is, and I'll tell you exactly what it does and how it works, and then do exactly what I tell you to do with it, you
Right,
know
right. Kyle,
I
I
don't.
knew this was going to happen, man. So I knew this was going to happen. We're going to have part three, part four, part five. I just know there's just going to be some great conversations. So, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose my thoughts so many times, Kyle. So, how do you first? Can I tell you a quick story?
Yeah.
I sell a product, a program. It's actually 7 videos and 7 PDFs. But within that course, it's a mini course. You could get through it in 40 minutes. It's called Coach or Teach Like an Artist, right? And I tell the story of a 5 a.m. client I had. Her name was Margot.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in there with an agenda. And Margot, she was a ER physician.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 a.m. I mean, I showed up with that agenda because that's what trainers do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I designed the program. We're going to work the program. And Margot was just like, I just want to run today. And she just didn't want to get off the treadmill. I was like, nah, come on, we got to do this. No, I just want to run. Oh, no, I wrote this, blah, blah, blah. We got to do this. We got to work on this. We got to work on that. I just want to run. Anyways, I was pushy. I was a new trainer. I was pushy. This was probably in like 1999, 2000 or something like that. She fired me.
Mm-hmm.
She fired me because I did not paint with the colors that were there.
Yeah.
I didn't respect her chronobiology. I didn't expect her fatigue levels. Who knows, man? She was an ER doctor. She probably had a horrible night, just wanted some quiet time. And here comes Jason
Mm-hmm.
pushing his agenda.
All right, Coach Jason.
Coach Jason pushing his program at 5 a.m. and poor Margot just wants to run and go home and see her partner. Seriously. So I lost her. And dude, I used that. I was like, shit. I
Mm-hmm.
will never do that again, and I will start to respond much more to people's energies. I was a new trainer, and I was an idiot.
Well, I mean, I certainly have similar experiences. I also think that like there's this like culture of like thinking that again like we can control it, or that we're supposed to like kind of pave our own way. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
We want to pave our own way, right? Which means like I know where I'm going to pave, and I'm going to stomp my way through exactly where this trail should go, despite like maybe it not being the route that makes the most sense in terms of energy efficiency. It's the same as like getting into a river and being like, well, I'm going to paddle upstream,
Right.
just like force my way up. Whereas like, we're probably better off accepting that we're kind of like moving downstream, right? And the best we can do is like row and paddle with it, and probably accept that we're like learning how to paddle as we're going.
Yes.
You
That's the
know?
that's the definition I use for improv, actually, going with the flow, the art of going with the flow.
Mm-hmm. But it's also the art of listening,
Yes.
and like this is why like I say that I think I wrote about this as well, but like about this idea of like the basics, right? And like, I really believe that like sensitivity and this ability to listen is
Yes.
a basic. Like
Yes.
that's like ground floor foundational for being a human being, right?
Yes.
And when we lack that capacity to listen, right, we don't know when to put in whatever the thing is that we're going to do. I mean, you know, from jujitsu, it's like if someone is trying to force an armbar, it's a lot different than like an armbar emerging because you were listening and it fit.
Right. Right. Yes.
More often
So
than not, it's not going to fit.
yeah, so I love this word listen that you use because it can be, with our ears. But
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes, I was just reviewing the podcast that you and I did together on your show,
Yeah.
and we were talking about listening, but we were talking about listening to the environment and the signs that the environment gives us while we're moving or while we're just walking or playing outside or listening is a great verb.
Yeah. Full body listening. I mean, like
Yeah.
to me, that is like that's number one. Like I brought this up with somebody. I maybe wrote about it, but like I was in Milan when I was touring through Europe, and I got to take jiu-jitsu class for a week in Milan at this place called Milanable with this dude named Andrea Baggio, who was amazing. Someone in Berlin was like, "Hey, if you're going to Milan, you got to go find Andrea. He's like incredible." And he and I sat there and chatted, and he was like, "Man, like in terms of teaching jujitsu, sensitivity is number one."
Number one.
He's like, I don't, he's like, the techniques and the moves and like these things are like fine, but like none of them matter if you lack sensitivity. And we sense and we feel that when we're in a conversation with somebody. When somebody lacks the capacity to listen, they try to have the same conversation with every single person, right? When the reality is like the way that you and I are going to speak is totally different than how you're going to speak to like your wife or how you're going to speak to your kids or how you're going to speak to any one of your students, because like there's a unique synergy that exists or has
Yes.
the potential to exist between each person, and that comes from like listening, and that's how you develop the ability to react authentically. But like when we're not conditioned to like the welcoming of being lost and the welcoming of surprise, we're going to try to control it. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to tell my exact 5 stories the same way every time. And like, I'm going to speak in this tone. And even though Jason prefers that I stand a little further away, I'm going to stand super close to him because like, that's how I've chosen to always communicate with people.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's deep, man. Your body's always listening too, right? I think when we spoke last time you said your nervous system is always listening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. I mean, you walk into a room and you know.
Mm-hmm.
You just know, right? It's not even a conscious knowing. It's just like, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's what this is."
Yeah. And I think that's like sometimes what I mean when I tell people that like there's nothing actually for you to like learn. Like you already have all the things.
Yes, that's why that word facilitate is awesome,
Yeah, like I think
right?
that teaching makes you almost feel like you're not enough, like you don't have the things.
So, Kyle, let me ask you this. How do, because people do come to us as, I don't know if you use the word teacher for yourself. I do for me because I actually enjoy that.
Hmm.
And people have said, Jason, you're a great teacher. So I'll go with that. I'll wear that label.
Hmm.
And people do come to us to learn,
Hmm.
right? So, how do you blend instruction
Hmm.
with pure play, pure freedom?
Yeah, I think that. Well, first, I don't think it's like. Sometimes we say like, I think when people think of play, it's almost like you're just like throwing your arms in the air and anything can happen.
Yes.
Ultimately, like when we're moving through the world playfully, we're always kind of like dancing with the constraints of a situation or a point in time or a person or anything. So in some ways it's not just kind of like throwing it all up in the air. But what I always think about doing is like, rather than giving instruction that's in the form of answers, I almost give instructions that are in the form of questions. Like I play a little bit more of like the what if game. So
Mm.
I'm like, we're going to play this game that looks kind of like this, but like, what if you do that? What if you add to it this way? What if you go this way? What if you steal from people? Like a lot of permission to be like, there is no way to do this. And if you get lost and find something else, like, you should go there too. It's not, yeah, I've taken workshops and classes where like things are presented in the form of answers. Like, I know, here's the way,
Yes.
right? When you present something, or when I present something in the form of questions, I kind of hope that it's received in the way where it's like, here's a nice question, or here's a nice thing to go and explore and look at. And there's like an infinite number of ways that you can walk through that. And I hope that you find it and then come back and share with all of us like your way.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the first workshops I did with our buddy Frank Frenchich, he
Yeah.
yeah, somebody said, Frank, how should I squat? Frank never met this person, right? And there's about 20 of us in the room, and we're like playing with sticks or something, right? And the person says, Frank, how should I squat? Frank's like, we met 30 seconds ago. I don't know how you should squat. I don't know anything about you. I can't answer that question. How should you squat? Do you have real knees? Do you have real hips? What is, I know nothing about you. I can't say this is the way you should squat.
Right. And also don't know like the context of your life. Like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? Like,
Anything.
what are the tasks that ask from you? Like, do you have kids? Like, like all these things. And like, even with all of that information, I'd still be like a little like, I don't know, but
Yeah, right.
I think that there's just so much that like we
Or
kind of.
squat during what task, or squat during which riddle?
Mhm. That's why I'm convinced, sometimes people are like, oh, like, everybody should be able to do this number of pull-ups or this number of push-ups or this or that. And I'm like, I don't know. I actually don't know. Like, if I am a farmer and a fisherman and, I play hockey on the weekends, there are certain things that will probably be like, well, that would be a little bit helpful physically. But if I'm a painter and a musician and I like playing, um, Gears of War or something in the evenings, well, that looks a little bit different too.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we spoke about this before as well. Have you ever heard of blue zones?
No.
No. So blue zones are these places on Earth where people live to be over 100 years old.
Oh, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ikaria, Greece is one. Okinawa is one. There's one near San Diego, a Mormon community. But they all have like six or seven traits of these communities where people live to be over 100, right? And none of them do formal exercise. None. They're exactly what you said. I'm a fisherman. I'm a gardener. I'm a musician from 6 to 8 o'clock at night. They're just physical, but there's no formal. Can you do 30 pull-ups? You know,
Right.
they're dancers, fishermen, whatever, gardeners. So, and they live to be over 100. And the cool thing is, they actually report the highest levels of happiness on polls and surveys also. So I'm always thinking, like, sometimes when I go to a commercial gym and I'm like, that person is just outright miserable
Mhm.
on that. Here I have my grandmother with her babushka in the garden, and she's completely satisfied to be working with the dandelions and the snow peas. And then I have George over here on the treadmill, who has to dumb down his experience because it's so miserable, with loud stimulating music, an additional TV screen on the treadmill, just to keep himself occupied, because what he's engaged in is not meaningful, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot about like, Katie Bauman talking about, outsourcing our movement,
Totally.
right? And, you know, I think that that's something always worth considering, that like the movements we do in movement or exercise are still just a fraction of like the movements that we have the capacity to do and would have been doing more often. Even when she talks about chewing, you know,
Yeah.
like we don't even eat like the harder parts of meat and carcasses and things anymore, when we would have been chewing so much more, which would have also like asked a lot movement wise.
Yeah.
I think
Right.
movement is like only what we see on Instagram or in like men's health or women's health and fitness or whatever it is. And it's it's so much more, you know. The
So much
tragedy
more.
is that like the beauty is that like we don't have to like go searching for energy. The tragedy is we don't have to go searching for energy,
Yes. Yes.
you know, because also like when we have to search for energy, it's like we really need to be efficient in how we search for it, you
Yeah.
know,
That's one thing
how
that we totally don't pay attention to. Like the whole industry, fitness industry is about expanding energy. But we could
Mhm.
go completely 180 and be like, this is how you use less energy. Like
Mhm.
why, I have a history in the kettlebell world, and they're always talking about tension and how you should squeeze absolutely everything and contract everything when you're doing a press overhead. And
Mhm.
I'm like, if I can accomplish that press overhead without squeezing my anal sphincter, I should be, I should probably rock it with the less tension, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is why, like, I mean, I said sensitivity before, but like the other thing that I think is a basic is rhythmicality. Like, I
Yeah.
really believe that, like, in our bodies, like, we have this way to like have this like internal symphony that can play together so efficiently, right?
Yes. Yes.
But because we have this like privilege of like energy on every street corner, right? And other things, we end up like really doing things in dreadfully like energy inefficient ways in how we move, right? You know, like we could be doing things so kind of like graceful if we could figure out how to like explore this interconnectedness that exists from like the ground to our fingertips, right? And instead we're just like, well, I'm going to do a bicep curl, which is like, you know, we would have never, it just doesn't make any kind of like symphonic sense.
Maybe something like this, feeding ourselves, but that's about it. Closest.
But even then, it would have been there'd be more like kind of like body involved or like lift something into our
Yeah,
mouth
right.
or something. It just it's so kind of yeah, like this idea of like really kind of isolating things and doing things in extremely effortful ways. I really think is like a privilege and maybe a bit of like an emergence of like energy being deeply accessible.
Yes. Yeah. Katie's point is so well understood. And Kyle, you know what breaks my heart also with all of the billions of dollars that the fitness industry makes and all of the money that we spend to get people
Mhm.
involved in movement, we only reach 3% of the population. And I
Mhm.
think it's because we have made movement not fun because we
Yeah.
have removed the rhythm, we have removed the community, we have removed the sensitivity, all of that. We have done a poor job of actually being advocates.
Yeah, and it's like it doesn't how do I say this? Like there's not like a cultural need for movement. Now it's like a hobby,
It's
you
a
know,
hobby, yeah, or something
rather
you have to do to stay healthy. Have to do in quotations, right?
right. So it's like it's not ingrained in like our day-to-day life in the same way. You know,
Yeah.
so like now we have these like privileged ways of being like, well, I'm gonna go learn jujitsu or and I'm gonna learn gymnastics and I'm gonna learn breaking, you know, when in the past, like all of these things probably happened simultaneously, you know, like they were all just kind of embedded in how you existed with your community.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and it wasn't codified all the time. And it wasn't always, it was definitely wasn't measured, you know, like these things were just done because they mattered in ways that like supported the culture and supported the community.
Yeah.
Now it's like we do them for more selfish reasons.
Yeah. So I'm always reminded of I was raised in a small coal town in Pennsylvania, right? And one side of the town is Polish and Slavic, Slovak, I should say. I'm sorry for all the Eastern Europeans,
Mm-hmm.
Slovakian and Polish. And on the other side is all the Irish, right? There's a bunch of Germans too. But when I was young, all the Slavic individuals would get together and have these huge, I'm just going to call them dance parties.
Mm-hmm.
They were just dance parties of like grandparents and great grandparents out on the dance floor doing their ethnic dances. And it was just the whole town was there.
Mhm.
And I don't see that at all anymore, ever. Specifically in the town that I'm from, everybody is just so divided. And I always think if maybe if we had these community movement get-togethers, of course, food is involved,
Mhm.
other things can be involved, but it would just be a much happier community, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just think that like there's this like this always this need to like rationalize things and be like, I'm not going to do something unless I know why.
Yes, the why.
And like the why is going to be different for everybody. It might be different for every time. It might be different for every moment. But like only doing things because you know why it matters, other than like it could be you feel drawn to it or it seems interesting, or but like the being like, I need to hold in my hand exactly why
Yes.
I have to do this.
Yeah, where did that come from, Kyle?
I don't know. I think it has to do with like this like culture of like growth, right? Which I'm really not a huge fan of. Like I really, if
Yeah,
someone
that and
says growth,
productivity. I'm
yeah,
like growth and productivity, get out of here.
right. Where
And
it's like
goals. Yeah.
exactly like everything is about collecting, everything is about increasing, everything is about winning, everything is about holding on. Yeah, everything is kind of individualist in that way. I think that, when you are more open to change rather than growth, maybe the why doesn't matter as much, right?
Yeah.
It can be just because,
Just
you know.
because. Yeah.
I carved I saw this fighting monkey video where they took a cube of wood and they carved it into a spear.
Yeah,
And
I
I
love
did it.
that. Yeah.
I did it. It took me 8 hours and I got a tick bite in along the way. Um, but I remember everybody who was kind of around was asking like, well, why are you doing it? Why are you doing it? Why? Why? Like they couldn't wrap their head around me doing it without a why. And it was kind of just like, I'm just curious. Like I'm really curious, like what's going to happen, or like if nothing's going to happen, or how it'll feel to like make a ball out of a cube. And the same goes for like the dancing. It's like people have been drawn together to dance for like thousands of years, right?
Thousands. Yeah.
And it has so many things. It has so many things. Like why try to distill it down to one thing? I
Yeah.
think that's something that makes me sad when I look at videos online too, where someone is like posting a video of them maybe doing some sort of game, and they're being like, well, this is for hip mobility or this is for this specific thing. And I'm like, well, then you're telling people that they should only do it if that's what they're looking to do, when it can be a lot of different things. It can be a game about exploring, getting lost. It might also improve your hip mobility at the same time, but it also might be this sensitivity game, and it might be this game, and it might be that. It, like to see exactly what something is all the time and what it has to be
Yeah.
might limit like who decides to kind of put their hands on it.
Yeah. So closely related to your why, Kyle, is my
Yeah.
what.
Uh-huh.
And it's usually, I remember taking a workshop with a dancer, and then somebody said, what is this working?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean? Like, what is this working? You didn't just take the 90-minute class that I did. Everything was working. Even your spirit, man, your tongue, your teeth, your ears, your eyebrows. It wasn't just like your quadricep, your VMO. What do you mean? So closely related to your why is my what? Like,
Yeah.
what is this working? Is it the
Mm-hmm.
bicep? Is it the tricep? What is it? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always goes back to that. We have to know shit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But maybe the knowing comes from the experience of actually doing it. I don't know, man. I'm just a wanderer, you
Well,
know?
I think that it's so much of that like desire for control. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? The words and the definitions make us feel like we're more in control than we actually are, rather than accepting like, man, we're gonna get lost. And the way that I get lost more gracefully is by having more information, because the more information I have, the better predictions I can make. Right. So that's just basically exploring different forms of communicating with myself, with other people, and with the spaces that I move through. Like And that is so intangible. And anytime I try to attach words to exactly what it was, it's probably still just a small fraction of what happened, you know?
Right.
And like when we try to talk about jujitsu, like in, in the words and in the definitions of techniques and this and that, man, that is just like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of what's actually going on. Like
Yeah.
everything else that's going on could only be described with art or poetry, you know?
Yeah.
Because like it's like you're talking about two human beings having an authentic interaction that involves their like nervous system like expressing itself at the highest level. You're like, so why distill it down to like, turtle, seatbelt, half guard? It's like those are fine, like because it helps us be able to like create a little bit of a dialogue about it. But there's this whole other thing about like the listening and the feeling and like the like how do you describe that thing where you almost like where you kind of punish somebody into giving something to you, you know? You'd be like, these are so, there's just so much more. And like, yeah, I think that like the why turns people away or the what turns people away because if you don't have a why or a what, the people who are collectors will not do it, because we're led to believe
Hold
that like
on,
we
hold
should
on. I got to write that one down. The people that are collectors. What was it? Finish that phrase for me, Kyle. We'll move on or something.
yeah, I think I said the collectors won't do it. Yeah.
Yes, the collectors, the technique collectors. That's great. Yes, it's true, and we see that everywhere. I think you actually spoke about that once, and please forgive me because I went down that rabbit hole of all your blogs, so I think I confused some things. But you wrote about, or maybe it was actually a podcast that you were on when you actually owned the studio in Brooklyn,
Mm-hmm.
and you were talking about progressions
Yeah.
and collecting progressions.
Yeah.
And then it's always like, well, what's next? Right? It's
Yeah.
like, great, you have a 30-second handstand. Well, what's next?
Right.
Right? And what technique do I want to collect next? Is it a one-handed handstand?
Mm-hmm.
Or, instead of just being present in the moment and enjoying the process. Right? I think that's where you're speaking about on that. And that's a tough one. That's a jujitsu thing also. Instead of just enjoying the flow, it's like, what technique can I collect next?
But also, like, what I think is really interesting is when the exploration of a technique is an emergence of the play or the dance or the fighting, right? Like, that's why I don't necessarily enjoy the like kind of standard jujitsu approach of like you show up and you do a warm up and then you're taught a technique and then you roll, right? What if you like showed up, maybe did some different kind of warm up than what always normally happens, um, did some sort of rolling, which led to like an investigation of like, okay, well, what positions am I ending up in? Okay, well, maybe that technique there would be really helpful. Maybe I'll drill that technique because now I've learned from where I was just at through like the rolling. And then
Yes.
we'll go back and roll again.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think that there's something there where it's like, it's the same with like any sort of like, I think maybe that's what I like about some of the counterculture activities as well. It's like you need to go surf and you need to go rock climb and you have to go skateboard and you have to go roll and you have to go dance to then go back to the drawing board and be like, well, that's what I learned when I was doing the thing.
Yeah.
And now I'll narrow in rather than being like, well, I'm just going to learn all the techniques, like then you don't have any like context for like why you're learning them or any kind of reason to learn certain techniques, because you don't need them all. You actually don't
No,
need.
man, I think I have five,
Yeah.
right? I think I have five, and half of them are laying cross-eyed on somebody, just waiting for them to get tired.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like I think I guess I'll have to say that like I like when techniques emerge from curiosity, and I think curiosity can be fed through the free play or the open form or the sparring. Like that's where you get to ask your own kind of personal questions emerge from that. The what if I do this or what if I knew how to do that, as opposed to like I always like Francich's precision and romance thing, and I talk about it a lot, but the idea of like we always start with precision and then go to romance. And precision is that place of the defined terms, and romance is the like we go for it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as he points out, like we don't get too far away from precision when we try to go to romance, and we see that with like, closed flows or just sequences or only working with choreography or something where it's like one technique after another. Whereas I love his proposal of being like, well, what if we begin with romance, which is all I'm really saying. Like, what if we begin with the bigger thing? Like,
Yeah.
what if someone comes to a jujitsu class and we start with play jitsu,
Yeah,
right?
totally. Yeah.
And then let that be like the bring us into, okay, well, what did you learn there? What position were you in most of the time? Like, what did you notice your partner do that might have been really helpful for you?
Right. Yeah. So Frank got that from a gentleman named Alfred North Whitehead. And
Mm.
so this gentleman, Alfred North Whitehead, the name of the essay is The Rhythmic, I know you like that word, The
Mm-hmm.
Rhythmic Claims of Discipline and Freedom. And within there, he has three stages. It's romance is number one, which I absolutely love that word romance. Romance, the second stage is precision, and the third one is play. But sometimes he changes it to play, precision play, exactly going back to what you just said. What if we came in and played a little bit, then we addressed the technique, and then we played again, but on a deeper level because we have a greater understanding of the precision necessary. So that's a great article. If anyone's listening, it's called The Rhythmic Claims of
Mm-hmm.
Discipline and Freedom. The author's name is Alfred North Whitehead. Romance, precision play. I think soccer coaches use enthuse, instruct, play, and enthuse is sort of similar to romance. Not as nice, but
Mm-hmm.
and Marcelo does a wonderful job of this, Kyle. If you look at his warm ups, Marcelo Garcia, black belt, runs a school in, is it in Manhattan, Kyle, or
It's in Manhattan, yeah.
yeah, the warm-ups, at least of what I've seen online, are completely play-based, like dive rolls and
Mm-hmm.
tag and wheelbarrow play and all that stuff. And then the technique, and then I've never experienced one, unfortunately. I think I would get murdered if I were on the mat out there.
Yeah.
But then the third stage is playing again and just
Mm-hmm.
rolling again. And Marcelo, I'm sure he came about that on his own, discovery, but he uses Frank's and Alfred North Whitehead's approach. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that like there's something there, and I think that like it's just the accepting that like not everything needs to be definable. I so at Marcelo's, um, kind of like the second in command, I would say that's always the way I've thought of him is Paul Schreiner,
Yes, yeah.
and the man is amazing. He's a great teacher. If anyone has a chance to take one of Paul's classes in New York, like he's awesome. And I had him on my podcast, and like, man, he just said some really profound stuff. Like when he was on there, he was the one who said, the art of jujitsu is not the techniques, it's what happens in between the techniques,
Yes.
which is genius. He was on there talking about like how I wish people in jujitsu would be more playful, right? Because I mean, we see this like people don't necessarily in hobbyists, like they don't play jujitsu playfully. They train jujitsu almost competitively all the time.
Right.
That people have like their game,
Yeah.
right? And they stick to their game because then they can win and they can like go home feeling great. But it's like he's basically saying he's like, no, like the learning happens when you're not playing your game. The playing your game is to try to like limit learning and limit getting lost so that you can win.
Yeah.
And it's a different way of doing it.
People that do not do jujitsu or I don't know how to explain it, but when people take up that art, it changes everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard? I was fortunate enough to work at a bookstore when I was younger. The best retail job I ever had. Like I would just get lost for 8 hours. I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm working," but I'd be over reading books. Right? There was a book called Verbal Judo.
Uh-huh.
Ever hear of it?
No.
No, and it's just how to use judo or jujitsu in everyday conversations. It's more of a business setting, but Jocko Willink was just talking about it on he says he does jujitsu in his leadership and his stuff like that, you know, his warrior spirit type of thing. But um, it just reminded me that, and Henner and Huron talk about that. Man, when I do jujitsu, when I put on my jacket in the morning, I do jujitsu, right?
Mhm.
It's the art of being gentle. When I pick up my kids in the morning,
Mhm.
I use jujitsu. I use efficient movement. I use, you know, playfulness. I use, you know, energy efficiently. So such a deep study, and I wish, well, maybe you and I can do a better job, Kyle, of getting everybody that we work with
Mhm.
to play jujitsu.
Well, I started doing a lot of like what I call play jitsu when I do the infinite play.
I saw the one video, the recent, was that Tom Wexler?
No, 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 no,
Oh, he
no.
looked like him. I can't, the hair buns screw me up
Yeah,
sometimes.
it's funny. And it was actually talking with him. He reminds me of Tom as well. He's from Israel as well.
This
Um,
gentleman was from Israel?
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? What's up with the Israelis all looking like Ito and having hair buns?
um, but I mean, I integrate in like, people would call it rough housing, and I just like the word play jitsu, but it's all the same thing really. But to do it non-competitively, I think is the real trick,
Yeah.
right? Because once you take competition out of it, people will take risks. When you're trying to win something, you are much less of a risk taker,
Yeah.
and like the learning is in the surprise. So for me, like presenting those types of games and being like, okay, well, it's so easy to get people to be cooperative when they're playing something by themselves, or be cooperative when they're dancing with somebody or playing with somebody, right? But to be like, we're going to be some version of combative
Yeah.
and cooperative. Well, that's a whole different thing.
Yes. So Frank, I'm so fortunate, Kyle, to know you and to know all these other educators as well. Frank has that term cooperative challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Can we stop saying competition?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
and I also just think like I don't know why everything always needs to be competitive.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
think
know
it's the
why.
American way. I think it's just like
Yeah,
one upmanship the whole time. I just think it's our heritage to be like, that's my land. Get the fuck off my land.
yeah,
That's
and
my cow.
right,
Whatever.
and not realizing that like man, our magic is so much in our ability to cooperate on all levels, you
Yeah.
know. And I mean, I've so like in these roughhousing settings or these play jitsu games, what I always say, it's the same thing I say with every other one, but I feel like I have to like reinforce it with this. From like, I don't want you to play for yourself. I want you to play for the other person,
Yes.
right? You're both playing for each other. I want you
Yes.
to play with the intention of helping that person learn. What does this game look like if I'm helping you learn
Right.
versus I'm playing for me? So it's
Yeah.
almost not even talking about the competition piece. It's just saying play to help the other person learn. So like I play this game that I call alligator flipping. And maybe you've done it where it's like one person lays on their stomach, the other person's just trying to turn them over like an alligator. That's the
Okay.
whole game, right?
Right.
But I'm not saying turn the other person over and don't get turned over. I'm saying that's what we're doing, but more importantly, help the other person learn. Listen closely to who you're playing with, right?
Mm.
So like if you're the alligator, right, and I'm the alligator flipper, like for me to help you learn, it might actually be giving everything that I fucking got to try to turn you over, because like that is who you are and that's where you're at with this, right? But as I'm trying to turn you over, you might be like, oh, like I feel Kyle has done jujitsu for like 5 years. He's got some sort of understanding of putting his hands on a body, like all these different things that you're either thinking or not thinking in terms of placing that intention, right? And you're playing in the way that's helping me learn about turning somebody and putting my hands on somebody because you're paying close attention to me, not just
Yes.
the winning thing. So I
Yes.
always say like it's a very special experience when you're playing something and you're taken care of, but not because you have to take care of yourself, but because the other person is taking care of you. And I
Yes.
think that this can happen in all these different settings.
Yeah. I agree. Totally. It's beautiful. Yeah. Have you ever played judo, Kyle?
No.
No. So judo and jujitsu, they're the same lineage, right?
Hmm.
And judo, I'm actually more attracted to judo because it has a deeper philosophy, let's say. I don't know if that's the proper term, but they have these tenets, right? Like maximum impact. Wow, geez, minimum energy, right? That's one of them, right? But one of them is mutual benefit.
Hmm.
Just going back to exactly what you said, mutual benefit. And they actually have a term. They had it in the judo school that I trained at in Philadelphia, smiling randori.
Hmm.
If you weren't smiling, and these were killers.
Hmm.
They were killers. There was Japanese players there, Israeli players there, Belgian players. They were killers. They were killers. Their technique was so beautiful, and they used no energy. And if if they wanted to throw you with high speed impact, they would save you just at the last minute so they wouldn't hurt you. But they had this culture of smiling randori. And if you
Hmm.
weren't smiling, you were doing it incorrectly. And it was just a beautiful learning environment because there was no stress. We're just having a good time. Kyle and I are just helping one another learn, you know?
Hmm. I mean, yesterday I went and rolled, and I rolled with two different people. I rolled with a lot of different people, but two people who were kind of about the same size.
Yes.
One gentleman was like, he might have been even like a little bit older than me. It was just kind of like a slower pace. And like, I deliberately let him like take the top position and even like pass a little bit because I was like, I can feel like what's going on here. Different parts, like I did a sweep or something, but it was like, this is what this game feels like. And like, this is me. It's not right or wrong, but it's me attempting to listen to like where this person is at, you know? I think not long after that, I rolled with this guy who I've rolled a number of times with. And again, he's about the same size as me, but he's like 22. And I
Yeah.
think he like wrestled in school.
God bless you.
Yeah. And I think he just got his blue belt. And
That's the
when
worst
I,
combination right
yeah,
there.
but I was like, oh, like I'm going to really give this person some like top pressure because I'm thinking like, this is what I think this person needs to learn right now. Like to me, I'm like, this guy's young. He's really like robust and resilient. He's super fast, right? And can kind of get by on the speed. But I'm like, maybe he just needs to feel what it's like to have a body kind of like smother him into the ground and learn how to like address that and deal with that. But that's the listening, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah.
And that's that deeper skill that like we can actually learn through these things,
Yes.
right? I can be there and be like, I'm helping him learn. Maybe he's helping me learn with his own intention. I don't know. But that's what I'm going in with. But by going in with that, I'm like, I'm facilitating, I think, the opportunity for me to like expand my potential for sensitivity by being like, well, who am I with? What is that asking for?
Yeah. It's a good study, man.
I think it's important. And I just think it like matters in the world.
Yes.
Like it matters off the mats. It matters like outside of movement. It matters outside of Instagram. Like if we explore more of our potential for sensitivity, I think that like all kinds of interactions that we have in the world look profoundly different. I think that we start to see a little bit more of like that the lines are blurrier between like myself and yourself, right?
Yeah.
Or like me and the space that I move through. There's just a little bit more of like, oh, like there's a richer communication with all things. And right now, I think our communication is just super limited. And I
Yeah.
and I and I express and I experience that too. I'm not somebody who like lives in the woods and does bushcraft and has this like deep understanding through my innate sensitivity. But I do believe that the exploring of it matters deeply in the world outside of just the movement context.
Yeah. I think I got this from you, Kyle. You shared somebody else's work. And he uses the word sensible.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have all these abilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't talk about sensible, able,
Mm-hmm.
sense able, right?
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty cool. You use the word sensitivity a lot, and it's true. We don't spend enough time with it. Kyle, let's wrap this up, my friend. Thank you so much for talking with me. We could probably speak for 13 hours every single day.
Amazing. Well, we'll schedule more down the road.
We'll schedule more, and we must do something together in the physical world. Um, I don't own a facility. I know a few local parks, Kyle, that are just longing for your infinite play workshop, so we can speak and get those set up if you'd like. It's only maybe 90 minutes from your beautiful city of New York,
Nice.
depending on traffic. um, is there anything that you would like to tell our listeners, Kyle, about your resources and your work?
Yeah, I mean, first one is I have my podcast Behind the Movement. You can find it everywhere, Spotify, my website, etc. I do a weekly newsletter that I call the Moves Letter. So you can subscribe for that. I'm doing a weekly class every Saturday in Prospect Park here in Brooklyn. It's donation based, so everybody is welcome to come, and whatever you can give is perfect. Yeah, and all the information on those things is available at my website, kylefincham.com. And then I'm also on Instagram, the Infinite Play Guy.
Beautiful. Kyle, thank you so much, sir. I appreciate you being here with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.